Another glorious day in the new millennium. I was just snacking on some Go-Gurt while listening to a Britney Spears CD. Now I'm responding to a few emails on my BlackBerry. You know, just a few of my favorite activities that I haven't thought about in years. But I do remember using this BlackBerry. I remember loving it. It was one of my most prized possessions in high school. And believe me, I had some pretty important correspondence to keep up with at the time. I don't care about it at all anymore, though. Now I have an iPhone. Because in the end, my BlackBerry was just a phone with a keyboard. The iPhone was a new idea, an idea of what a phone could be. And that idea made Apple the biggest company in the world. Crypto, at its core, is also an idea of what our society could be, an idea that might be big enough to change the way we live once again. And it's hard to kill ideas. We think crypto's here to stay. The only question is crypto here for good? Welcome to Coinage. I'm Zach Guzman. Today, we're talking about utopia, the ideal, perfect world that's been dangled in front of us since the days of Sir Thomas More. History has its fair share of examples, some that have delivered on their promises and some that have not. There's America, the promised utopia of a more perfect union, eventually sold so fervently that its believers toppled a king. But there's also American Idol, a utopia that has produced almost no bangers since the illustrious Kelly Clarkson. And that's the funny thing about any utopia that's offered up as a better alternative to the status quo. It might sound better, but how do you really know it will be better? It's one thing to imagine a utopia, it's another thing entirely to build one. And when it comes to crypto, the founding ideals aren't too far off from the same things the founding fathers once promised. Centralization of power can lead to some dark outcomes. Decentralizing that power might be better. That lesson has been proven time and time again. The people of North Korea stuck following generations of horrible haircuts? Bad. Ticketmaster adding whatever fees they want for my Kelly Clarkson tickets? Also bad. The 2008 financial collapse triggered by the risks taken on by only a few key players? Very bad. But could simply decentralizing something really mean it's better by default? There's a reason, after all, most institutions are highly centralized. It works. While checks on power might be America's first export, the efficiency to build thousands and thousands of combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bells is our legacy. Which, depending on your tastes, might beg the question, is crypto's ethos of decentralization enough to get us to that utopia we've been searching for? Let's start by defining what crypto is. Magical internet money? A big Ponzi scheme? The once favored currency for buying drugs online? There's truth to all of those. But when people talk about crypto, they don't just necessarily mean digital money. They usually mean a constellation of things, including digital money, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, NFTs, like the Bored Apes, which remain confusingly worth more than your car, and Web3, a blockchain-based vision of the internet. So crypto is already more than digital money, and it hopes to be a lot more than that. But the path ahead is long and winding, and the road to financial ruin is paved with big dreams and high ideals. Though, even in the worst case scenario, you can still land a TV deal.
Come with me, and let's build the future together.
Because they will trust you.
But aside from Bitcoin, the largest project in crypto is Ethereum and its currency Ether. Introduced in 2013 by a teenager named Vitalik Buterin, Ethereum aims to be much more than just a store of value. It wants to be the world's computer. And it has enabled most of the things we label as crypto today. Some might think it's just another Bitcoin, but that'd kind of be like calling Beyoncé Kelly Rowland's former bandmate. Sure, Bitcoin was the first blockchain, and some people still think the best cryptocurrency, and it gets compared to digital gold. But that's because Bitcoin basically does one thing extremely well. It's a reliable store of value. Insofar as 70% fluctuations in value can be called reliable. But that's a topic for another time. The best thing Bitcoin has going for it, except being the first cryptocurrency, is that it's also the most decentralized cryptocurrency. Bitcoin isn't run by anyone. Instead, it's run by everyone. Everyone who can buy a $300 graphics card and troll around on Reddit for an afternoon. Unfortunately, that everyone also includes the Island Boys.
What be going on Coinage? The crypto show Coinage is totally biased and can't be trusted. It is the worst NFT project out of all NFT projects that could have been paid by.
But Bitcoin's decentralized community is actually really powerful because for nearly all of human history, we've relied on sovereign governments to issue and back our cash. Not only does Bitcoin not need a central authority to exist, but it would actually be pretty difficult for any centralized entity to destroy it. Okay, so for that reason, Bitcoin gets compared to digital gold. Meanwhile, Ethereum is often compared to digital oil, more functional and practical. Why? Well, Ethereum is programmable. Users can upload pieces of code or smart contracts on the blockchain, so suddenly Ethereum is a lot more than just digital money. It's anything code can do, which is a lot. It's like the iPhone. Instead of Apple trying to design every app its users could want, it created the App Store and let developers run crazy. And it worked. We've come a long way from iBeer after all. Refreshing. So while Bitcoin is decentralized money, Ethereum is decentralized everything, at least potentially. And it hopes to revolutionize finance, culture, and maybe even the entire world. You see, Vitalik and Ethereum's founders had a bigger vision, a vision that's beyond even Ethereum. But it's one Ethereum has come to embody, and many people around the world have come to believe. That vision is called Web3, a term first coined by Ethereum co-founder Gavin Wood.
We need to create technologies that forge new ways of being able to work with each other. And that's really a big component of Web3. Web3 is really about allowing people to come together and coordinate their efforts for something greater than the sum of its parts.
Here are just a few of the things that Ethereum thinks it can do through the power of decentralization. It thinks it can help the more than 1 billion people without bank accounts access their money with nothing more than an internet connection. It thinks it can turn back the clock on the internet's nightmarish privacy violations, at least insofar as tech giants are concerned. It thinks it can make the internet more egalitarian, a place where you can interact directly with your friends and family, even your paranoid Uncle Doomsday Prepper Paul. And it thinks it can get around censorship, so long as no government is too keen on censoring you. And that's all well and good. In fact, it sounds great. Except it's all reliant on a single premise, that decentralization is good, or at least better than the alternative. But is it?
You wanted to be safe from the government, so you became a stupid government.
Our current institutions are relatively centralized, and they're built around trust more than you might realize. Well, it turns out those institutions weren't always deserving of that trust. In fact, for most of America's history, and maybe all of it, unless you were white, male, landed, and generally well-liked, you should pretty much have never trusted them at all. Just a few examples. Social media companies rely on extracting as much data as possible from their users, then they sell it to advertisers. Even really sensitive info like HIV status. Wells Fargo has paid nearly $3 billion to settle claims after its bankers fraudulently opened bank accounts in their clients' names. And for nearly a century, black families were redlined out of certain neighborhoods because the government refused to insure their loans. So there are plenty of examples of centralization gone bad. But is decentralization necessarily any better? And the short answer is no. In fact, many governments explicitly protect against a natural outcome of decentralization: populism. That's because a minority group, any minority group really, could easily be overwhelmed by a popular vote. And it's a good thing governments protect against that, because most social movements would never have made it out without strong central leadership. We all saw how well the first decentralized financial movement of the 21st century took off, Occupy Wall Street. It had worthy goals, sure, but we all saw exactly where those ended.
People come to a consensus meeting in the attitude of, I want to make a decision that everybody is comfortable with. I want us to all agree on something.
So where does Ethereum fall on that spectrum? Too decentralized or not decentralized enough? The answer to that is more complicated than you might think. Ethereum has struggled with its own decentralization, and its story shows the many pitfalls of running the largest experiment in decentralized governance since American Idol. Probably the most significant event in Ethereum's history was the hacking of the DAO, one of the first decentralized autonomous organizations on Ethereum. In 2016, the DAO raised $150 million in less than a month to act as a decentralized VC fund. That was roughly 14% of all ETH at the time. And all was looking pretty bright until one fateful day in January 2017.
I saw there was money going out in a very irregular way, which should not happen. And we found out later there was actually a bug or an error in the smart contract. Meaning there was a hacker able to steal or try to steal money from it. So in about a couple of hours, he actually had $50 million worth of Ether flown from the smart contract into another smart contract.
In the crypto world, once a transaction is set on the blockchain, it becomes law and cannot be undone. A principle we call immutability. There's no bank you can call up in order to reverse transactions and no higher order to appeal to, which even Waka Flocka knows all too well.
Fake, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake. They popped up in my wallet, I clicked on it to delete it. Immediately, they stole 19 grand. Happily, I just started this wallet, but they already stole 19,000 out of it. Need fucking help immediately.
Except for when everyone decides that the law sucks and should be changed. In this case, Ethereum's community voted on doing something unprecedented, forking the blockchain, creating a new version of truth in which the DAO hack never happened. The move split Ethereum in two, and some people still use the chain in which the hack wasn't reversed, which took on the name Ethereum Classic. But on the main Ethereum chain, the one you hear about in the news, the hack was undone, and history was rewritten. Early investors were bailed out, and those who might have fled from the Ethereum ecosystem stuck around. The blockchain was saved. Except for some, this version of events fundamentally tainted Ethereum, indelibly branding it as a platform willing to sacrifice its ideals to bail out its investors. In the end, decentralized organizations are only as noble as their members. Now that was 6 years ago, and Ethereum has grown up a bit since. Earlier this year, Ethereum successfully underwent an update dubbed The Merge, in which the entire network transformed from the electricity-gobbling proof-of-work method to the proof-of-stake system. That reduced its energy consumption by 99.95%, according to the Ethereum Foundation. In an industry rife with competition, a topic we'll explore throughout the season, this update showed that the project can evolve with the times without a single captain at the helm. To talk about the merge, the broader ethos of Ethereum, its long road ahead, and why decentralization matters, we're joined by Matt Cutler, CEO of Blocknative, a project looking to improve Ethereum transactions. Matt, thanks for joining us, man.
You bet. Happy to be here, Zach.
Why is decentralization good?
Decentralization is good because it maximizes programmability and composability in the network, and no entity, no person, no code, no government can control what happens on the network.
So why does everyone always try and copy Ethereum?
Well, I'd say Ethereum is clearly the innovation leader in Web3. Largely because it has the most active research community, the most active developer community. So generally the new stuff or the big new stuff happens in the Ethereum ecosystem first and then migrates elsewhere for other ecosystems that decide that those innovations are relevant to them or that they want to support similar classes of experience. That's not exclusive, of course. There are certainly innovations that happen in other networks, but there's just a overwhelming amount of intellectual capacity focused on the Ethereum ecosystem, and that gives it a tremendous advantage as it relates to pace and innovation.
What, in your opinion, is kind of the hardest thing to copy about Ethereum?
The big innovation and the focus of the Bitcoin ecosystem is decentralization above all else. And the Ethereum ecosystem came out of Bitcoin looking to be much more progressive technologically, embrace innovation as a core ethos, while still preserving or maximizing decentralization as much as possible. And so this is the core of almost all of the research as it relates to Ethereum is how do we create a more capable network, a more scalable network, a more reliable network, a more predictable network, a more affordable network, while both preserving and enhancing decentralization. It turns out it's really hard. It's easy to say the words decentralization. It's very difficult in practice, particularly when you have significant economic value flowing through it. And there are economic actors who know that if they can drive dimensions of centralization, they can exert control over a significant financial system and therefore stand to provide or realize significant gains. So in many ways, it's adversarial, where many of the participants in the network are trying to drive centralization, and you got to set up the rules of the game and set up the infrastructure to maximize decentralization.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say is that, in trying to find someone to talk about Ethereum, it was interesting to compare this experience in booking a guest versus some of the other chains where it's easy to get the founder of some other chain in here or do a story on the founder of another chain. But even reaching out to the Ethereum Foundation was like, look, man, we don't really control anything. And we're talking to you, which if people are paying attention, we maybe be able to update your title as president of Ethereum and see if anyone even notices. But,
right. That would go over well.
So when we're talking about decentralization around the merge, it was one of those things that was planned, move back, planned, move back, planned, move back. And I guess maybe that gets to the point around decentralization that there's not one person in control saying, I'm going to flip this switch. It's done now. We've upgraded. It's a lot of teams working together to make sure this is going to work, and it took some time. How would you maybe look at that as, again, that trade-off between, sure, a more centralized team could have implemented something like this, and it's no doubt a huge upgrade over what it was before, but these things take time, and now that it's done, Ethan is in a much better place.
The Ethereum merge is called the largest open source software collaboration and network upgrade that's ever happened in the history of mankind, which is pretty interesting to put it in sort of that context. It's sort of, there's sort of no obvious comparable in terms of like major in-flight upgrades. The purpose of the merge is to set the foundation for the future of Ethereum, which in many ways is trying to be the foundation of the next economy. And so there's a lot riding on getting the merge right and on cutting as few corners as possible. So for instance, one of the big pieces of the merge is there's not one piece of software which runs it. It's called the consensus layer client. There's actually six independent software teams, 6 independent sets of code, 6 independent implementations of a standard specification. And the point of that is to ensure what's known as client diversity, so that if there were to be a critical bug in one of these codes or one of these sets of code, or there was a critical vulnerability, or one of them were to go rogue, that there would be sufficient diversity both in code base and in operation on the network, that the network would be resilient to that. The result of the merge is a very deliberate attempt and a very deliberate design to increase the redundancy and resiliency in the network, and that has been achieved. It's pretty remarkable to see how that has happened. And so the merge is the foundation of a whole series of future upgrades, and it puts Ethereum in a very much a different class than, as far as I know, any other Web3 ecosystem. I mean, the technical achievement and the social coordination achievement of the merge is quite remarkable, and I would argue unprecedented.
So when you look at some of the trade-offs there, and I guess how Ethereum is upgrading itself, is there a risk? Is there a risk that Ethereum's moving slowly, methodically, but someone else could maybe reach innovation quicker than Ethereum's trying to?
There's always risk. And that's one of the fun parts of technology is, in the early days of any ecosystem, and by the way, this is true of desktop computers, this is true of operating systems, this is true of productivity software, it's true of websites, it's true of mobile devices, right? That in the early days of an ecosystem, there is a competitive race that happens, and it can be difficult or challenging to pick winners or losers. Also, you're going to have big players who come in who say, we're going to own this market, and then wind up falling flat on their face. And there's great examples of that as well. The thing I pay attention to more than anything, and I would encourage anyone out there to, is watch the developers. Just watch where the developers are, and researchers as well, particularly from academia, because they're the ones that determine what gets built.
What do you think is the biggest threat to Ethereum?
The biggest threat to Ethereum is itself, of course. Ethereum has a very ambitious roadmap, and it needs to demonstrate as an ecosystem that it can continue to ship. I think this is one of the biggest lessons of the merge, is the Ethereum ecosystem proved it can ship, and betting against its ability to not achieve its objectives is not a great bet. Now, it might take longer, in fact, much longer than anyone anticipates. And so the timing, predicting timelines, is not a particular strength of the Ethereum ecosystem today. But when it says, hey, we're going to get this something done, it's going to get it done.
Is this about anything other than money? Is any of these projects really about anything other than maybe buying into something, seeing it grow, selling, and making money?
I have participated in events for other ecosystems and was very surprised at how much that was just sort of blatant pumping from the stage and sort of people flaunting what they had, and just sort of I don't know, there's a certain, I would just say, distaste to that. It's just not fun or constructive to be a part of. I don't begrudge any of those folks for being part of that, but that's not how I like to roll. That's not who I want to hang out with, and that's not what gets me out of bed in the morning. And there are plenty of builders in the Ethereum ecosystem who don't hold a lot of ETH, right? Certainly some do, but plenty who don't. And they're working in this ecosystem because it's the most interesting, innovative, challenging set of technology on the face of the planet right now. And the opportunities are better than anywhere else as well.
I think there's another follow-up around, I guess, the trade-off between why decentralization is good is basically in the reverse, why centralization is bad, which might not be your point of view. But if you were to contrast them in terms of why decentralization is good over being centralized, what do you think that is?
Centralization means that there's some body, some person who controls the game, right? Who controls what is possible or not possible. And history shows that over a long enough time horizon, you'll have someone incompetent or someone corrupt in that central position. And a small set of actors can then implement changes or policies that affect many, many people and their economic reality, their political reality, their freedom of movement. And so at the end of the day, if you want a society which is truly free, you need a society which is free largely of centralized control that can exert undue forces and pressures on people's individual liberty. The Bitcoin white paper itself was basically a response to the failings of centralized banks during an economic crisis where a small number of banks made a whole series of very bad decisions and whole millions of individuals paid the price of that. And so at the end of the day, centralization creates the net conditions for both corruption and incompetence. And the idea is through properly built decentralized systems, you can avoid many of those challenges.
Why do we need to replace the internet? Or why is Web3 better?
Web3 promises significant advantages over Web 2 in the form of no central bodies who control the majority of experience, who control the data, who tell you what you can and cannot do, who monetize you, your data, your behavior without your knowledge or consent. So Web3 promises an open, programmable, and transparent network where users are fundamentally in control, not just of what they do and don't do, but the data exhaust they leave behind.
Appreciate you coming on. I'm not going to call you the president of Ethereum, but El Presidente of Ethereum, Matt Cutler, joining us there. Appreciate you taking the time, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Look, crypto will be here for a long time, but the jury is out on whether it will be a force for good. The lofty goals of decentralization are certainly laudable, but will they actually be achieved? Or will crypto just end up replicating the flawed systems we're all too familiar with, falling prey to profit-hungry VCs, opportunistic snake oil salesmen, and malicious hackers? That is less clear. Crypto is, of course, complicated. The coverage you've probably seen from the mainstream media focuses mostly on the downsides, like the hacks, collapses that have lost investors millions. Maybe you only know crypto as a speculative investment, and there is truth to that. But there's a deeper story out there about how crypto might just transform finance, culture, and governance. And that's the story Coinage is looking to guide you through across our 6-episode first season and beyond. But before we wrap up, let's talk about Coinage for a second. Why we started this, the first community-owned show, to try and answer crypto's biggest questions and get to the heart of why they matter. We're doing it because we think there's a better way to cover crypto. Crypto news is fragmented, uncontextualized, and incomprehensible to newcomers. It can feel like it's purposely confusing, like everyone who's made it to the other side purposely wants to keep everyone else out, as if confusion is a badge of honor. We disagree. We want to level the playing field, and we're going a step further. Crypto is an industry with the unprecedented potential for spectacular and lightning-fast returns, which means it's also uniquely plagued by charlatans, shills, and bias. So, we're relying on a community, not just to co-own the show with us and share in its success, which it will, but also to help us make it and to hold us and each other to account. Because a community-based movement deserves community-based coverage. Whether you're brand new to crypto or you're knee-deep in airdrops you can't get rid of, we want you to join us. If you want to get involved in helping us build the show and the future of media, visit us at coinage.media. I'm Zach Guzman. This was Coinage. Stay safe out there.